Good afternoon and welcome back to the 19th century, where men are men, women are women, and the King's Gambit is a very respectable chess opening. We have Paul Morphy in 1859 providing commentary on the 1834 unofficial World Chess Championship between McDonnell and Bourdonnais. State of play is that Bourdonnais is winning by 5 games to 2. We've had 3 draws, and it's McDonnell's turn to play with the white pieces. So without further ado, let's start the game. We have e4 from McDonnell, and Bourdonnais decides to play e5 this time. So finally McDonnell gets to play the King's Gambit, which is what it seems like he's always wanted to do every time he's played as white. So f4, and Bourdonnais accepts, and we have bishop to c4 with a comment from Morphy. He says, "This gambit, although mentioned by the earlier writers, was neither well analysed nor much practised until about the period of these matches. McDonnell has the honour of having first elaborated the attack, and Bourdonnais, in the course of these games, discovered and employed the defences which, until very lately, were generally regarded as the best." So the game continues. Bourdonnais plays queen to h4 with check, and the king moves aside to f1. And then Bourdonnais presses the attack with g5, knight to c3, bishop to g7, and Morphy has a comment here. He says, "McDonnell here invented an ingenious variation beginning with g3. Now, this isn't part of game 11, and I'm not sure which game it is a part of, but I just went down this line a little bit to see what Morphy's talking about. If the pawn captures here, then king to g2, which looks quite dangerous, but it's actually fine. If the pawn captures here, the rook captures here, and now the queen's getting chased all over the board whilst white develops his pieces, like so. Now this is attacking the fork here, threatening the rook and threatening the queen, so the queen has to move again. So basically, white gets a whole lot of development at the cost of the king being a bit exposed, but if you carry on, it's okay for white. So going back, in this game, McDonnell didn't play g3, he actually played d4. So the game continues with d6, bishop back to e2, and Morphy says, "The moves knight to f3 or e5 are the strongest at this juncture. The move in the text is weak." Okay, so let's see why Morphy thinks this. Well, this knight to f3 move comes with a tempo on the queen. The queen will have to move, and then white will get another move almost for free. Okay, so what about e5? Well, if captures, 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 then we get a fork, and black is losing the bishop here. If he doesn't capture, then white has made ground in the center, and black's development is still lagging behind. So the game continues with, as we said, bishop back to e2, which Morphy says is weak, and we agree with. Knight to c6, and now e5, but this is too late to push now. He should have played the tempo gaining move, forcing the queen back, and we have knight to d5, and we get a possible fork here, so the king has to defend. e5, knight on g to e7, knight to b5, threatening the fork, and black castles. We have the knight captures on c7 anyway, rook to b8, and now knight to f3, threatening the queen, so the queen now moves back to h6, and we have captures on d6. Knight to f5, and now c3, and Morphy comments, "Under the circumstances, the most advisable move on the board. Had he attempted to save the exchange, the superiority of black's game would have soon become still more marked." Well, incidentally, this same move, c3, is the best move as recommended by the engine, so Stockfish, McDonnell, and Morphy all in agreement that c3 is a good move, so I'm going to go with c3 as the best move here. But what's he talking about saving the exchange? Well, the move coming up is going to be knight to g3, and that's going to lead to captures and captures, the queen capturing the rook, and so it was a knight for a rook. So McDonnell will be down the exchange now. If he didn't like this and tried to defend it with, instead of c3, for example, king to f2, then we might have pawn to g4, attacking the knight. The knight tries to move, and now we've got a queen check here. And as you can see, the black pieces are very much encroaching and cramping on the white position, and it's not going to be fun for white. And so I think this is why everybody is recommending c3. So the game does continue with knight g3. We have the captures and the exchange, and the king moves out of the way, and Le Bourdonnais captures the pawn with check, the king captures back, and now we have an exchange of queens on d1. And we continue with h6 and b3, both of them trying to push their pawns. We have b5 and bishop to e3. And continuing to push the pawns here, f5 and d5, attacking the knight here. But it's actually a bad move that loses the game, starting with this fork here. So a better move for McDonnell would have been to move the king out of the way to f2. But he didn't do that. He attacked the knight, and so we have the fork. The king moves out of the way. The bishop is captured. The knight is captured. And Le Bourdonnais pushes this pawn to attack this knight here. So the knight moves to d4, and we have bishop to e5, check, forking this pawn here as well. But actually, a better move would have been rook to f1, pinning the bishop. This improves the position for Le Bourdonnais more than the bishop check does. But anyway, we have bishop check, the king moves out of the way, the bishop picks up the pawn, and the c knight picks up the b5 pawn. And Le Bourdonnais shows that he knows how to blunder with the best of them, so he throws away his winning position for a draw with bishop to c5. Why is this bad? Well, it gives white counterplay, attacking with his pawns on the queen side. A better move for Le Bourdonnais would have been to push his bishop to g3, and then the combined weight of the double bishops and the pawns moving forward will be too much for white. But okay, he didn't play bishop to g3, he played bishop to c5 to give McDonnell another chance. So McDonnell immediately pushes his pawn to b4, attacks the bishop retreats. McDonnell says, I'm the best blunderer, and moves his knight to d6, and he turns a draw into a loss. So why is this bad? Well, when the bishop captures the knight and the pawn captures back, this pawn is going to be undefended and it's going to fall to the rook. The best move instead of the knight move was a4, continuing to push pressure on the queen side. But he didn't. He played the knight move. Bishop captures the knight, the pawn captures the bishop, and the rook captures the pawn. And the game continues with an exchange on c8, so now we're down to 4 pawns each, but Le Bourdonnais has a pair of rooks against a rook and a bishop, so you'll expect the pair of rooks to win here. We'll see if he manages to do it or if he blunders again. The game continues, the pawn is pushed, and the king starts coming into the game, and we have bishop to b3. King to e7, king to f1, rook to e4, and king to e2. Rook to f8, king to d3, attacking the rook. Rook moves back to e5. We have rook to e1. Finally, the last remaining white rook gets into the game. King to d6. Rook takes e3, leading to a rook exchange on e3. And Le Bourdonnais starts pushing his h-pawn. King to e4, and the h-pawn keeps marching. Bishop to d1, trying to do something about these 2 pawns now, which are looking increasingly dangerous. And it just keeps coming. h3, captures on h3, captures on h3. Bishop to f3, trying to keep an eye on the corner square here. But the pawn keeps coming. h2, bishop to g2, and rook to f1. And at this point, McDonnell realised it was all over and he resigned the game. So Le Bourdonnais now leads 6 games to 2, building up a very good lead now. But why did McDonnell resign here? Well, of course, if he captures the rook, the pawn is just going to queen and then it's all over. If he doesn't capture and just maybe pushes a pawn, something like this, well, Le Bourdonnais is just going to queen anyway, and then you're going to lose the bishop. If you block, of course, the rook just captures, and then you're going to get a queen within 2 moves, so all over. So good game. I enjoyed that one again, and I hope you did too. And I hope to see you back for game 12.